Imagine a city so magnificent that its name became a synonym for power, for mystery, and for human ambitions stretched to its limits. A city of vast blue gates and temples that touch the clouds. This is Babylon. But what do we truly know of it? Is it merely the setting for a fabled garden, suspended in the air? Or is it the distant, oppressive kingdom found in ancient scriptures? Perhaps it's the origin of a legal idea so enduring we still whisper it today. The truth is, Babylon was all these things and so much more. For well over a millennium, it was a heartbeat in the ancient world, sometimes strong and dominant, sometimes faint, but always persistent. Its tale is an epic written not on paper, but in the very soil of Mesopotamia. And tonight, we will follow that tale from its first, quiet pulse to its final, fading echo. To comprehend the height of Babylon's towers, we must first look down, to the foundations laid long before its name was ever spoken. In the deep south of this river valley, civilization had already blossomed. While the site of Babylon was a whisper, cities like Uruk and Ur were thunderous declarations of human ingenuity. They were sprawling hubs of commerce, spirituality, and governance, with temples that served as bridges between earth and heaven. The architects of this early world were the Sumerians. In the dim twilight before recorded history, they achieved something revolutionary. They captured language, giving it a physical form. With wedges and clay, they invented writing. They constructed towering ziggurats, mountains made by human hands to honor their gods. They wove together the complex fabric of a society with laws, taxes, and rituals. Their unique tongue was the language of culture and administration for centuries. In every meaningful way, the Sumerians built the stage. They set the props, wrote the first acts, and established the themes. Every civilization that followed in this land, including the one that would someday take center stage, would perform using their script. The centuries rolled on, marked by the rise and fall of powers. The first great unifier was Sargon of Akkad, who around 2300 BC stitched together a sprawling empire. He created a model of centralized rule, a template of conquest and administration that future kings would desperately try to copy. Yet in the vast records of this Akkadian era, if you search for Babylon, you'll find only a passing glance. It remained an unremarkable dot on the map, utterly overshadowed by the holy city of Nippur or the wealthy port of Ur. Inevitably, the Akkadian Empire fragmented, its cohesion dissolving under pressure from within and from invaders known as the Gudians. From the chaos, a new center of gravity emerged, the third dynasty of Ur. These rulers were brilliant bureaucrats, imposing remarkable order, standardizing everything from the length of a cubit to the offerings in a temple. But through this period of renewed organization, Babylon still waited. It was a town under authority, governed from afar, its potential dormant. The catalyst for change came not from within, but from the margins. From the arid lands to the west, groups of people speaking a Semitic language, the Amorites, began a gradual, generations-long migration into the fertile river valley. Initially perceived as nomadic outsiders, they slowly settled. They learned to farm the rich soil, adopted local customs, and, in time, began to ascend to positions of authority. By the dawn of the 19th century BC, Amorite chieftains found themselves on the thrones of several important cities. And in the quiet settlement by the Euphrates Canal, an Amorite leader named Sumobum established his rule around 1894 BC. This was the genesis, the founding of Babylon's first dynasty. No fanfare celebrated it, no epic poem was composed. It was a simple, factual change in leadership. But this was the turning point. From this moment, Babylon had its own king, its own crown, and its own gathering ambition. The kings who followed Sumobum began a deliberate campaign of consolidation. They strengthened the city's defenses, secured the agricultural lands around it, and engaged in a delicate dance of rivalry and alliance with neighboring Amorite rulers in cities like Larsa and Eshnunna. They also started crafting a soul for their city. They championed their divine patron, Marduk. Once a god of little renown, his stature was carefully cultivated, his mythology expanded to mirror Babylon's own ascent. This partnership between a city and its deity would become the core of its identity for ages to come. The machinery of state, inherited from Sumer and Akkad, was maintained and refined. Scribes kept records, merchants traveled established routes, and the city's walls inched outward. So, as the 18th century BCE began, Babylon was no longer insignificant. It was a cohesive city-state, fortified, administratively competent, and strategically placed. It was a coiled spring. The world around it was a fractured landscape of competing powers. Larsa controlling the fertile south, Eshnunna commanding eastern trade, Mari holding vital northern routes. The air was thick with tension and opportunity. And onto this stage walked a new monarch, a son of Babylon. He possessed a vision that would extend far beyond the battlefield. His name was Hammurabi. What kind of kingdom, what kind of legacy, could such a man build from this foundation of patient growth? When Hammurabi inherited the throne of Babylon around 1792 BCE, he took command of a kingdom that was respectable yet constrained. It was stronger than it had ever been, yet still encircled by rivals who viewed it as merely another player in a crowded, dangerous game. To the south, the formidable Rimsin of Larsa held sway over the richest farmlands. To the northeast, Eshnunna controlled mountain trade. To the northwest, the kingdom of Mari dominated the middle Euphrates. And to the east, the shadow of Elam loomed, always a potential threat. Hammurabi's genius was not in blind aggression, but in strategic patience. For the first 20 years of his reign, he avoided grand, sweeping wars. Instead, he focused inward, strengthening his city's canals and granaries, and outwardly weaving a complex web of diplomacy. He formed alliances, only to let them fray when convenient. He watched and he waited. The turning point came when he saw his chance to strike at the heart of southern power. Aligning with allies, he turned his forces against Larsa. The campaign culminated around 1763 BCE with a decisive victory. With Larsa's fall, Babylon absorbed its wealth, its cities like Uruk and Uar, and its spiritual authority. Suddenly, Hammurabi was master of the entire south. But he did not stop. Former allies became new targets. He marched on Eshnunna and subdued it. Then, in a move that shocked contemporaries, he turned on his one-time partner, King Zimri-Lim of Mari. The city was captured, its famed palace burned. Whether this was punishment or a permanent solution, the outcome was clear. Babylon's dominance now stretched from the Persian Gulf to the upper Euphrates. Hammurabi understood that conquest alone was fragile glue for an empire. True power needed structure, ideology, a shared sense of order. This ambition crystallized in his most enduring legacy, a testament not carved on a battlefield, but on a pillar of black stone, the Law Code of Hammurabi. Erected in a public place, this stele contained nearly 300 rulings, etched in the Akkadian language of administration. It addressed everything: the price of grain, the duties of a surgeon, the consequences of theft, the intricacies of family law. Its famous prologue declared his divine mandate, to bring righteousness to the land so that the strong might not oppress the weak. The laws reveal a society meticulously organized yet starkly hierarchical. Justice was not one-size-fits-all. It depended on whether you were a noble, a commoner, or an enslaved person. The principle of retaliation, an eye for an eye, was present, but tempered by these social divisions. It was a code designed to standardize, to bring predictable order to a diverse and newly conquered realm. More than a legal document, it was a political masterpiece, a declaration that all peoples under Babylon answered to a single, kingly vision of justice, sanctioned by the gods. Beyond the law, Hammurabi shaped his empire through brick and mortar. He restored temples, declaring his piety. He strengthened city walls, showcasing his power as protector. He dredged canals, proving his role as provider. These were the timeless duties of a Mesopotamian king, and he performed them masterfully, tying his rule to both divine favor and earthly prosperity. Under his long reign, the god Marduk was elevated to new heights, his status rising with the city he protected. For over 40 years, Hammurabi ruled, and Babylon stood as the undisputed center of the world it knew. But empires forged by a single, towering figure often struggle to outlive them. When Hammurabi's son, Samsu-Luna, took the throne around 1750 BCE, the cracks began to show immediately. The southern cities, resentful of Babylonian control and taxation, erupted in massive revolt. Uruk, Isinur, they all rose up. Samsu-Luna crushed the rebellions, but at a terrible cost. The city of Uruk was sacked so thoroughly it never fully recovered. The campaigns drained the treasury and devastated the very agricultural base that fed the empire. And as Babylon fought to hold its south, new powers emerged from the margins. From the marshy, labyrinthine regions near the Persian Gulf, a dynasty known as the Sealand Kingdom arose, controlling vital waterways and eluding Babylonian armies. In the north, old rivals like Eshnunna regained independence. The empire was fracturing, shrinking back towards its core. The kings who followed, Abiyeshu, Amidetana, Amisaduqa, were caretakers of a fading legacy. They focused on religious observance and legal continuity, but could not reverse the tide of fragmentation. Amisaduqa is noted for his detailed astronomical records, a hint of the scholarly tradition that persisted even as political power waned. But the realm was a ghost of Hammurabi's vision. The final blow came from a direction no Babylonian fully anticipated. From the distant, mountainous highlands of Anatolia, a people called the Hittites were expanding their reach. Their king, Mursili I, launched a daring, long-distance campaign down the Euphrates. Around 1595 BCE, in a stunning raid, the Hittite army descended upon Babylon itself. They plundered its wealth, seized its gods, and then just as suddenly withdrew back to their homeland. They did not stay to rule. It was a spectacular, devastating smash and grab. The raid shattered the remnants of the first dynasty. The last king, Samsu-Ditana, was overthrown. The great line of Hammurabi was extinguished. Babylon was left leaderless, humiliated, and exposed. The city entered a dark age, a period of sparse records and competing factions. The Sealand kings lurked in the south. Various local leaders vied for control. But from this chaos, a new stability would slowly emerge, not from native Babylonians, but from a people who had long lived on the empire's edges. A people from the Zagros Mountains to the east, who would step into the power vacuum and rule Babylon not for decades, but for centuries. They were the Kassites, and their long, quiet dynasty would become one of the most stable, yet overlooked, chapters in the city's entire story. What kind of rulers would these outsiders prove to be? Could they hold a wounded city together? In the unsettling quiet that followed the Hittite raid, Babylon was a prize without a clear owner. The city's heart had been shaken, its treasuries emptied, its political order shattered. For several decades, a fog of uncertainty hangs over the historical record. Minor dynasties and local chieftains likely controlled fragments of the old realm. From the southern marshes, the Sealand kings continued their separate rule. It was a time of fragmentation, a pause in Babylon's grand narrative. But from the eastern highlands, a people who had long been part of the Mesopotamian landscape began a slow, deliberate move toward center stage. They were the Kassites. Originating in the Zagros Mountains, the Kassites were not unknown. For generations, they had served as mercenaries, border guards, and settlers within Babylonian territory. They were familiar, yet distinct. In the power vacuum left by the fallen dynasty, they did not launch a sudden, violent conquest. Instead, their ascent was gradual, a steady accumulation of influence until, by the early 16th century BCE, a Kassite leader named Agum II took firm control. His reign marks the true beginning of one of the most enduring regimes in Babylon's history, a dynasty that would hold the city for over 400 years. The Kassites were shrewd consolidators, not revolutionary conquerors. Their first crucial act was one of profound symbolic restoration. Agum II recovered the statue of Marduk, which had been taken from the city during the preceding turmoil. Returning the divine image to its temple in Babylon was more than a religious duty, it was a brilliant political statement. It announced that the Kassites were not destroyers, but restorers. They came not to erase Babylon, but to repair it, to legitimize their rule by linking themselves directly to the city's most sacred traditions. This would become the hallmark of Kassite rule. They adopted Babylonian culture wholesale. They used the Akkadian language in their administration. They worshipped the Mesopotamian pantheon, with Marduk at its head. They rebuilt and endowed temples, securing the support of the powerful priesthoods. To the average Babylonian, life under Kassite governance may have felt like a continuation, a return to normalcy after a period of frightening chaos. The foreigners on the throne became, over time, indistinguishable from native kings, taking Babylonian names and marrying into local elite families. Their greatest contribution was stability. For 4 centuries, Babylon experienced a remarkable absence of catastrophic upheaval. The Kassites established a well-organized provincial system, managed agriculture and trade efficiently, and introduced a distinctive legal artifact, the kuduru. These were stone boundary markers, intricately carved with symbols of the gods, that recorded royal land grants to loyal officials or temples. They served as deeds, but also as religious talismans, protected by divine curses against anyone who would dare remove or alter them. These stones tell us of a society concerned with order, property, and the intertwining of divine and legal authority. During this long Bronze Age afternoon, Babylon re-entered the world stage not as a brutal aggressor, but as a diplomatic peer. The Kassite kings corresponded as equals with the other great powers of the time, the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of the Hittite Empire, the rulers of Mitanni, and the rising power of Assyria. Letters from the Amarna archive in Egypt show Babylonian kings addressing the pharaoh as brother, exchanging gifts of lapis lazuli, gold, and chariot horses. Babylon was part of an international club, its sovereignty recognized, its wealth evident in this flow of luxury and diplomacy. Culturally, it was an era of preservation rather than radical innovation. Scribal schools meticulously copied and recopied the ancient literary, religious, and scholarly texts of the Sumerian and Akkadian past. The great epic poems, the Omen series, the mathematical tablets, all were safeguarded, ensuring the transmission of knowledge that was already millennia old. In this, the Kassites acted as faithful curators of a civilization they had adopted as their own. Yet, no dynasty lasts forever, especially not in the ancient Near East. By the late 13th century BCE, pressures began to mount. Assyria, to the north, was growing increasingly assertive and militarily powerful. And from the east, the old kingdom of Elam was undergoing a fierce resurgence. The Elamites had long been rivals, but under a forceful king named Shutruk-Nahunti, their ambition turned into outright invasion. Around 1158 BCE, Elamite forces stormed into Mesopotamia. They captured Babylon itself, a devastating repeat of the Hittite disaster centuries before. They looted the temples and, in a supreme act of cultural violation, carried off the statue of Marduk once more. This was the death knell for Kassite rule. The last Kassite king was deposed, and the dynasty that had provided 4 centuries of stability collapsed. Babylon was plunged into another period of disarray. A series of weak, short-lived native dynasties, like the Second Dynasty of Isin, attempted to rally a Babylonian revival, but they were swimming against a powerful new current. For while they tried to reclaim past glory, a transformed and hungry power was solidifying to the north. Assyria was no longer just a kingdom, it was hardening into an empire with a relentless, militaristic ideology. The long, relatively peaceful Kassite interlude was over. The stage was now set for a different kind of story, a brutal, centuries-long duel between 2 Mesopotamian titans, Babylon and Assyria. A struggle that would be defined less by cultural assimilation and more by raw power, pride, and a deep, burning resentment. How could the ancient, revered city withstand the machine of war that Assyria was becoming? With the Kassite dynasty a memory and the Elamite invaders eventually forced back, Babylon entered a new and profoundly challenging era. The city's sense of self was still rooted in its ancient cultural and religious prestige, but its political reality was increasingly dictated by a formidable, aggressive neighbor to the north. Assyria had evolved. It was no longer just another regional kingdom. It had become an empire engine, fueled by military innovation, administrative rigor, and an ideology that glorified the king as the unassailable instrument of the god Ashur. Babylon, weakened and internally divided, found itself squarely in the path of this juggernaut. The relationship began with interference, not outright conquest. Assyrian kings saw Babylonian instability as an opportunity to extend their influence. They started by installing puppet rulers, local nobles, or even Assyrian princes on the throne of Babylon, demanding loyalty and tribute. To the Assyrian mind, this was prudent statecraft, securing their southern flank. But to the Babylonian priesthood, the merchant elites, and the common people, these foreign-backed kings were illegitimate, little more than governors wearing a crown. The sacred bond between the city and its ruler, a bond blessed by Marduk, had been broken. This tension between foreign political control and native religious authority would become the central, agonizing theme of the next 3 centuries. The first major explosion of this conflict came under the Assyrian king Tukulti-Ninurta I in the 13th century BC. Dissatisfied with proxy rule, he took a direct approach. His armies marched south, captured Babylon, and he declared himself its king. But he went a fateful step further. In a move that shocked the conscience of Mesopotamia, he looted the temples of Babylon and hauled the sacred statue of Marduk back to his own capital, Assur. This was more than a military victory, it was a spiritual catastrophe. To remove a city's god was to strip it of its divine protection, its very identity. The act ignited smoldering Babylonian resentment into open, lasting hatred. Even within Assyria, Tukulti-Ninurta's sacrilege was seen as dangerously arrogant. He was eventually assassinated, and Babylon managed to reclaim a degree of independence in the aftermath. But the pattern was set. Assyria would assert dominance. Babylon would chafe, rebel, and suffer devastating retribution. For decades, this grim cycle repeated. Periods of nominal Babylonian autonomy were followed by Assyrian campaigns to restore order. Kings in Babylon, like the capable Nabu-apla-iddina in the 9th century BCE, would use these brief respites to rebuild temples and promote culture, only to see their work interrupted by the return of the Assyrian army. The Assyrians, for their part, learned that sheer force was not enough. They began to employ a dual strategy, the ruthless crushing of rebellion, followed by attempts at cultural co-option. Assyrian kings would fund the restoration of Babylonian temples, participate in rituals, and inscribe their own names as pious benefactors. They wanted to be seen not just as conquerors, but as legitimate heirs to Babylon's ancient mantle. It was a difficult mask to wear. The Babylonian populace, their history steeped in a sense of superior civilization, largely saw through it. They viewed the Assyrians as crude northern upstarts, their power derived from the spear, not the favor of the true gods. This cultural disdain made Babylonian loyalty a fleeting, expensive commodity for Assyria to maintain. The struggle entered its most volatile phase in the 8th century BCE, as the Neo-Assyrian Empire reached its zenith of power and ambition. A new type of king sat on the Assyrian throne, Tiglath-Pileser III. He was a ruthless reformer, transforming the empire from a network of tributary states into a system of directly administered provinces. When a succession crisis rocked Babylon after the death of its king Nabu-Nasir, Tiglath-Pileser saw his chance. In 729 BC, he invaded, deposed the Babylonian ruler, and did something unprecedented. He crowned himself king of Babylon. This was a calculated move to absorb Babylon's legendary prestige into the Assyrian imperial project. He performed the rituals, made offerings to Marduk, and tried to govern as a dual monarch. For some pragmatic Babylonians, this direct Assyrian rule was preferable to chaos. But for many others, it was the ultimate humiliation. Their city had become merely another province, its throne occupied by a foreign emperor. And it was from this simmering pot of resentment that a new champion of Babylonian independence arose. He was not from the old urban elite, but from the dynamic, tribal peoples of the southern marshes, the Chaldeans. A Chaldean chieftain named Marduk II, known in biblical texts as Merodach Baladan, seized the throne in 722 BCE, taking advantage of an Assyrian succession dispute. For 12 years, he ruled a defiantly independent Babylon, forging alliances with Elam and presenting himself as the true, native restorer. He was a hero to the Babylonian sense of self, a symbol that resistance was possible. His defiance could not stand. The Assyrian king Sargon II eventually crushed the rebellion, and Marduk fled into exile. But the idea he represented, of a Babylon free from Assyria, refused to die. It lingered in the temples, in the whispers of the priesthood, in the pride of the people. The stage was now set for the final, most brutal acts in this long rivalry. The Assyrian throne would soon pass to a son who viewed Babylon not as a prestigious jewel to be polished, but as a rebellious limb that might need amputation. His name was Sennacherib, and his wrath would bring Babylon to the very brink of oblivion. What does an empire do with a city that cannot be tamed? Sennacherib, king of Assyria, was a ruler of immense capability and profound, simmering anger. He inherited an empire at its peak of power, but also a persistent, festering problem, Babylon. He viewed the city not with the cautious reverence of some predecessors, but with a cold, pragmatic disdain. It was, in his eyes, a nest of perpetual ingratitude and treason, a drain on Assyrian resources and patience. His father, Sargon II, had tried reconciliation after defeating the Chaldean rebel Marduk. Sennacherib would try a different path. Early in his reign, he moved to assert control, installing his own son, Ashur-nadin-shumi, as king of Babylon. This act of placing a crown prince on the throne was meant to signal permanent, unbreakable Assyrian dominion. Instead, it inflamed Babylonian passions further. The city saw not a ruler, but a hostage-taker in royal garb. The situation spiraled when Elamite forces, ever ready to exploit Assyrian difficulties, swooped in, captured Sennacherib's son, and took him to Elam where he vanished, likely executed. The loss of his son transformed Sennacherib's disdain into a personal, white-hot rage. He launched a punishing campaign against both Elam and the Babylonian rebels who had supported the incursion. But this time, his objective shifted from punishment to eradication. He had come to a chilling conclusion. Babylon itself was the source of the poison. The city's very existence, its deep cultural memory of independence, was the root cause of endless rebellion. And so, he resolved to remove that root. In 689 BC, Sennacherib gave an order that would echo through history with a unique tone of horror. His army systematically destroyed Babylon. They did not just sack it, they methodically dismantled it. Canals were diverted to flood the streets. The great temples, including the Asagila of Marduk, were torn down. The statue of the god was seized. Walls were razed, palaces were pulled apart brick by brick. The city was left a desolate, waterlogged ruin. In his own inscriptions, Sennacherib framed this not as mere cruelty, but as divine justice, a necessary cleansing of a wicked, recalcitrant place. The act sent a shockwave through the ancient world. Even by the harsh standards of Assyrian warfare, this was extreme. Babylon was not a foreign enemy capital. It was the spiritual heart of Mesopotamia, a city whose religious significance transcended politics. To annihilate it was seen by many, even within Assyria, as an affront to the gods, a dangerous violation of cosmic order. Sennacherib had solved the Babylonian problem through obliteration, but in doing so, he created a profound ideological and moral crisis for his own empire. When Sennacherib was later assassinated by one or more of his own sons, according to tradition, many saw it as divine retribution for his sacrilege. His death paved the way for a dramatic and unexpected reversal. His successor was another son, Esarhaddon. And Esarhaddon looked upon the ruined site of Babylon and saw not a solved problem, but a gaping, dangerous wound in the fabric of the world. Esarhaddon's reign became an exercise in atonement and political genius. He openly repudiated his father's act, framing the rebuilding of Babylon as a sacred duty imposed upon him by the gods themselves. His first symbolic act was to return the statue of Marduk to its rightful home. He then embarked on a decades-long, massively expensive project of reconstruction. The Asagila temple was rebuilt. The city walls rose again. Canals were redug and neighborhoods were restored. He consulted meticulously with Babylonian priests to ensure every ritual detail was correct, presenting himself not as a conqueror, but as a pious servant chosen by Marduk to heal what had been broken. Politically, he was equally shrewd. He restored lands and privileges to the Babylonian elite and priesthood, mending the bridges his father had burned. He presented himself as a king of justice and restoration. To many Babylonians, weary of decades of violence, Esarhaddon was a godsend, an Assyrian ruler who finally understood their world. His masterstroke, designed to ensure lasting peace, was a novel plan for succession. He decreed that upon his death, his empire would be split between two of his sons. His elder son, Shamash-Shum-Ukin, would rule as king of Babylon. His younger, but seemingly more dynamic son, Ashurbanipal, would rule as king of Assyria. The idea was elegant. Babylon would have a native-speaking, culturally attuned king who was also part of the imperial family, binding the two realms together in fraternal harmony. It was a vision of shared power, of a united Mesopotamian dynasty. It was also a tragic miscalculation. When Esarhaddon died, the brothers assumed their thrones. For a time, the peace held. Shamash-Shum-Ukin governed Babylon, tending to its temples and traditions. Ashurbanipal, from Nineveh, focused on expanding Assyrian power, campaigning as far as Egypt and building the legendary library that would preserve so much of Mesopotamian literature. But the imbalance of real power festered. Ashurbanipal controlled the imperial army, the foreign policy, and the flow of tribute. Despite his royal title, Shamash-Shum-Ukin increasingly felt like a glorified provincial governor, a puppet whose strings were pulled from the north. The resentment grew year by year, fed by the whispers of Babylonian courtiers who remembered independence and chafed under Assyrian oversight. Finally, around 652 BC, Shamash-Shum-Ukin's patience snapped. He made a secret, desperate gamble for true sovereignty. He formed a grand coalition, reaching out to Assyria's enemies, Elam, the Chaldean tribes, Arab groups, and even disaffected regions within the empire itself. Then he declared open rebellion. The gamble triggered a cataclysmic civil war. Ashurbanipal responded with the full, terrifying force of the Neo-Assyrian war machine. The conflict raged for 4 brutal years. Ashurbanipal methodically strangled the rebellion, crushing Elamite allies first, then laying siege to Babylon itself. The city, so recently rebuilt, endured a horrific blockade. Famine and disease ran rampant within its walls. The grand coalition shattered under Assyrian pressure. In the end, Babylon fell once more. The fate of Shamash-Shum-Ukin is shrouded. Assyrian sources claim he perished in the flames of his own palace. Ashurbanipal's victory was total, and his punishment was severe. Babylon was looted, its leaders executed, and its brief dream of autonomy under the shared kingdom model was extinguished in blood and ash. The brotherly war had solved nothing. It had only deepened the old wounds, proving that the Assyrian yoke, whether worn willingly or by force, was the only reality Babylon could expect. The city was broken, again. And yet, as the dust settled, a strange silence began to descend over the north. The mighty Assyrian Empire, victorious everywhere, was about to encounter an exhaustion of its own. And in that gathering quiet, a new figure was waiting in the southern marshes, watching. His name was Nabopolassar, and he was not interested in sharing a throne with anyone. In the aftermath of the fratricidal war, Babylon lay under a heavy, enforced silence. Ashurbanipal's victory had been absolute, his reprisals thorough. The city's political ambitions were shattered, its autonomy a distant memory. It existed now as a prized and perpetually resentful possession of the Assyrian Empire. Yet, even in this state of subjugation, Babylon's deeper rhythms continued. Priests still performed the rites for Marduk in the rebuilt Esagila. Scribes in temple schools still copied ancient tablets, preserving the literary and scientific knowledge of millennia. The city's spirit was bruised, but its cultural heartbeat, slow and steady, refused to stop. Meanwhile, in the north, the Assyrian colossus began to show signs of immense, internal strain. Ashurbanipal, for all his military and scholarly brilliance, had pushed the empire to its limits. The constant, grueling campaigns from Egypt to Elam had drained manpower and treasure. The brutal suppression of vast rebellions, like Babylon's, had sown deep seeds of hatred across the realm. When Ashurbanipal died, the empire passed to a series of weaker, less capable rulers. Without his iron will, the intricate machinery of control began to shudder and jam. Provinces grew restless, rival claimants to the throne emerged, sparking civil wars within the Assyrian heartland itself. The invincible facade was cracking. In the marshlands of southern Babylonia, a Chaldean chieftain and military leader named Nabopolassar watched this unraveling with a shrewd and patient eye. He understood power, having likely served within the Assyrian system himself. He saw not chaos, but opportunity, a once-in-a-generation chance to rewrite the fate of his homeland. Around 626 BCE, as Assyrian authority in the region wavered, Nabopolassar made his move. He seized control of Babylon and declared himself its king. This was not another fleeting rebellion. It was the founding act of a new dynasty, one born from a profound, collective yearning for freedom. The early years of his reign were a desperate struggle for survival. The Assyrians, though weakened, were still formidable. They launched repeated campaigns to crush this upstart and reclaim their southern prize. But Nabopolassar proved to be a master of defensive warfare. He used the difficult, canal-cut terrain of Babylonia to his advantage, leveraging the support of the Babylonian populace and his own Chaldean tribal networks. He wasn't just fighting against Assyria, he was fighting for a cause, Babylonian independence, that finally had a leader who could hold the line. Then, a geopolitical miracle occurred. From the Iranian plateau, a new power was rising, the Medes. Under their fierce king Cyaxares, they had built a powerful military force and were themselves pressing against Assyria's eastern frontiers. Nabopolassar, in a stroke of strategic genius, reached out to this distant potential ally. The two powers, the revived Babylonians and the rising Medes, forged an alliance. Their goal was not merely to resist Assyria, but to destroy it utterly. The combined campaign was a masterpiece of coordinated annihilation. While Nabopolassar's forces secured Babylonia and pushed northward, the Median armies swept in from the east. They began taking Assyrian cities one by one. The twin pincers closed on the Assyrian heartland. In 612 BCE, the allied armies arrived at the foot of the greatest city in the world at that time, Nineveh, the magnificent capital of the Assyrian Empire. The siege was fierce and merciless. After a matter of months, the defenses were breached. The city was subjected to a thorough and catastrophic sack. Palaces built over centuries were put to the torch. The great library of Ashurbanipal, a repository of countless texts, was buried in the collapse. The king of Assyria, Sinsharishkan, was killed in the fighting. Nineveh, the symbol of Assyrian might, was erased from the earth. The alliance pursued the remnants of the Assyrian court and army to their last redoubt at Haran, and then, with Egyptian support, to a final battle at Carchemish. By 609 BCE, it was over. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, the terror of the ancient world for centuries, had ceased to exist. In its place stood two victorious powers. And for Babylon, the victory was transformative. Nabopolassar had achieved what countless Babylonian kings had only dreamed of. He had not just won independence, he had vanquished the empire that had oppressed, dominated, and nearly erased his city. Nabopolassar spent his final years consolidating this breathtaking new reality. He was the restorer, the avenger, the founder. He re-established the full rituals of kingship in Babylon, lavishing attention on the temples and confirming the priesthood in their ancient roles. He secured the borders and began the process of rebuilding an empire, but this time, a Babylonian one. His most crucial act was ensuring a smooth succession. He passed a stable, secure, and powerful kingdom to his son. This son would not inherit a city-state or a subject province, but the mantle of a new imperial power. His name was Nebuchadnezzar. When Nabopolassar died, the throne passed without dispute to this prince, who had already proven himself a capable military commander. The transition was seamless, a rarity in Mesopotamian history. The dynasty, born from rebellion and forged in a war of extinction, was now firmly rooted. Babylon was no longer a vassal dreaming of the past. It was the capital of the future, the heart of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. All eyes, from the ruins of Nineveh to the courts of Egypt, turned to see what this resurgent, triumphant city would do next. And under its new king, the answer would be to build, to conquer, and to create legends that would outlast stone itself. What does a city do when it finally, after centuries, holds all the power in its own hands? Nebuchadnezzar too ascended the throne with the wind of destiny at his back. He inherited not just a kingdom, but a mission, to crown Babylon's hard-won freedom with undisputed greatness. His father, Nabopolassar, had been the liberator and the soldier. Nebuchadnezzar would become the builder and the emperor, a ruler whose name would be inseparable from the city's most glorious and formidable image. He began by securing the empire's frontiers, launching campaigns to the west to solidify control over the vital lands of the Levant, once held by Assyria. The Babylonian army, hardened in the War of Annihilation, was a formidable instrument. It marched along the Mediterranean coast, receiving tribute from Phoenician cities like Tyre and Sidon, and bringing smaller kingdoms firmly into Babylon's orbit. But one kingdom, perched in the highlands, proved a persistent point of resistance: Judah. Judah's tragedy was its geography, caught between the fading influence of Egypt and the ascending power of Babylon. Its kings vacillated, at times swearing loyalty to Nebuchadnezzar, at other times listening to promises of Egyptian support. To Nebuchadnezzar, this was not just disloyalty, it was a direct challenge to the stability of his western frontier. After repeated warnings and failed rebellions, he decided to make a devastating example. In 587 BCE, after a long and brutal siege, Babylonian forces breached the walls of Jerusalem. The city was sacked. The Temple of Solomon, the heart of Judean religious life, was systematically destroyed. A significant portion of the population, the royal family, the priesthood, the skilled artisans, the warrior class, was forcibly relocated to Babylon. This event, the Babylonian exile, would become a pivotal, traumatic chapter in Jewish history, shaping theology, identity, and literature for centuries. For Nebuchadnezzar, however, it was a standard imperial procedure: neuter a rebellious region by removing its leadership and potential instigators, and repurpose their skills within the empire's core. The exiles were settled in communities around Babylon, not as slaves in chains, but as a displaced population contributing to the economy. Their presence added to the cosmopolitan texture of a city that was becoming the nexus of the world. But Nebuchadnezzar's true passion was not just conquest, it was construction. He embarked on a building program of staggering scale, aimed at transforming Babylon into a metropolis that would physically manifest its divine favor and imperial power. He wanted the city to be a wonder, a statement in glazed brick and towering architecture. His vision rose from the ground. He enlarged and fortified the city's defenses, constructing immense double walls so broad, it was said, that chariots could race atop them. He rebuilt and beautified the central religious complex, the Sagala, dedicated to Marduk. From this temple, a sacred processional way led to the city's most spectacular gate, the Ishtar Gate. This was not merely an entrance, it was a monumental artwork. Built of enameled bricks in a vivid, lapis lazuli blue, it was adorned with row upon row of bas-relief animals, alternating bulls and the serpent dragon Mu, symbols of the gods Adad and Marduk. Passing through this gate was meant to be an awe-inspiring experience, a transition from the mundane world into the divine and imperial heart of civilization. And then there were the gardens. Later Greek historians would speak of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They described tiered terraces, rising like a green mountain, irrigated by complex machinery, a lush, artificial paradise built to soothe the homesickness of a Median queen. Archaeological evidence for these specific gardens remains elusive, a subject of debate. But their persistent legend is telling. Whether a precise, colossal feat of engineering or a magnification of smaller, lavish royal gardens, the story stuck because it fit the image of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, a king of such boundless power and ingenuity that he could make the desert bloom for love or for pride. His reign was a golden age of consolidation. The priesthood of Marduk, fully restored, enjoyed immense prestige and wealth, anchoring the king's legitimacy in cosmic order. The scribal schools flourished, and Babylonian scholarship, particularly in astronomy and mathematics, entered a period of refined observation and record-keeping. The empire was administered through a sophisticated bureaucracy, its economy fueled by agriculture from the fertile south and tariffs from long-distance trade routes now secured by Babylonian arms. For over 4 decades, Nebuchadnezzar ruled. Babylon was no longer just a powerful city, it was the great city, its name synonymous with wealth, splendor, and formidable order. He had taken the legacy of vengeance bequeathed by his father and transmuted it into one of breathtaking creation. When he died, he left behind a skyline of miracles and an empire that seemed unshakable. But the very nature of his achievement contained a hidden vulnerability. The empire was deeply personal, a monument to the will of one extraordinary king. Its institutions were strong, but its identity was intensely tied to the charismatic figure on the throne. The kings who followed, his son, his brother-in-law, his successor, were lesser men, unable to wield the same authority or command the same fear and respect. The magnificent machine began to run down. Tension grew between the palace and the powerful temple establishment. And in the shadows, a new, patient power was watching from the east, studying the empire's strengths and waiting for a moment of weakness. The Neo-Babylonian Empire had reached its dazzling zenith. The long, slow descent was about to begin. What happens when the architect of wonders is gone, and only the caretakers remain? After the long, defining shadow of Nebuchadnezzar II passed, the Neo-Babylonian Empire entered an era of twilight. The kings who followed were not tyrants or fools, but they were custodians, not visionaries. They inhabited a palace built for a giant, ruling over a system whose brilliance had been designed by a sharper mind and a stronger will. The empire remained wealthy, its temples opulent, its scribes diligent. But the dynamic energy, the relentless drive that had characterized its founding decades, began to ebb. A subtle complacency set in, and with it, vulnerabilities began to surface. The throne passed through several hands with little drama but also little distinction. Then, in 556 BCE, a figure of a different nature ascended, Nabonidus. He was not of the direct royal line, likely a high-ranking official or a distinguished army commander. More importantly, he was a man of deep and somewhat unconventional religious devotion. His personal faith was captured not by Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, but by the moon god, Sin, whose primary cult center was in the distant, desert oasis city of Haran. From the beginning, Nabonidus's reign was marked by this spiritual preoccupation. He lavished attention on the temples of Sin, restoring the great Ihulhul sanctuary in Haran with particular zeal. In Babylon itself, this was viewed with growing unease. The priesthood of Marduk, long the kingmakers and ideological anchors of the state, saw the king's focus as a slight, a diversion of royal favor and resources from the city's patron deity. The careful, centuries-old symbiosis between the crown and the temple of Marduk, so crucial to political stability, began to fray. Then, Nabonidus did something unprecedented. Around the 10th year of his reign, he left Babylon entirely. He relocated his court to the remote Arabian desert oasis of Tema, and he stayed there for approximately a decade. His motives remain one of history's intriguing puzzles. Was it a religious retreat, a desire to be near other centers of sin worship? Was it a strategic move to control the lucrative Arabian trade routes? Or was it a political withdrawal, an escape from the mounting pressure of the Babylonian elite who disapproved of his policies? Whatever the reason, the effect was destabilizing. He left his son, Belshazzar, in charge of the administration in Babylon. But a crown prince was not the king. Critical royal rituals, especially the annual Akitu, New Year, festival, required the physical presence of the monarch to renew the covenant between the god, the king, and the people. Year after year, with Nabonidus absent, this vital ceremony could not be properly performed. To the Babylonian mind, this was more than an administrative oversight. It was a cosmic dereliction of duty. It suggested the gods were displeased, that the essential order of the world was out of joint. Rumors swirled, discontent grew, and the priesthood's alienation deepened. The empire's spiritual and political center was, quite literally, empty. While Babylon simmered with internal doubt, a new power was consolidating in the east with frightening speed. Cyrus, king of the Persians, had united the Iranian tribes under his banner. He had overthrown the Medes, conquered Lydia in Anatolia, and now ruled a vast, hungry realm that bordered the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus was a different kind of conqueror, pragmatic, intelligent, and a master of propaganda. He cultivated an image not of a destroyer, but of a liberator and a restorer of rightful order. As Cyrus's forces began to press on Babylon's eastern frontiers, Nabonidus finally returned to his capital, likely sensing the looming threat. He sought to rally the city, but the bonds of loyalty had weakened during his long absence. The defensive heart of the empire was conflicted. The military may have been prepared to fight, but the political and religious elite were deeply ambivalent about the king they were being asked to defend. In 539 BC, Cyrus's army approached Babylon. The details of the final confrontation are layered with later propaganda, but the core outcome is clear and astonishing. Babylon fell without a major battle. According to the chronicles, Cyrus's general, Akbar, diverted the waters of the Euphrates, allowing Persian troops to wade into the city along the riverbed through undefended gates. Whether through tactical brilliance, internal treachery, or a combination of both, the impregnable city was taken in a single night. The Persian account, immortalized on the Cyrus cylinder, paints a vivid picture. It portrays Nabonidus as an impious ruler who had offended Marduk, and Cyrus as the deity's chosen instrument to restore peace and proper worship. Cyrus claimed he entered Babylon peacefully, amidst celebration, to restore the gods to their rightful homes and allow displaced peoples to return. For the defeated, it was a masterclass in spin, turning conquest into liberation. Nabonidus was captured and sent into honorable exile. Belshazzar vanishes from history, his fate unknown. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, the glorious resurrection of Hammurabi's dream, ended not with a cataclysmic siege or a burning palace, but with a quiet, almost surgical, transfer of power. The last native dynasty to rule in independent Mesopotamia was gone. Yet, for the city itself, life changed less than one might imagine. True to his word, Cyrus did not sack Babylon. He knelt before Marduk, honored the city's rituals, and confirmed the priesthood in their privileges. Babylon became a royal capital of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, a treasured jewel in a much larger crown. The scribes continued their work, the astronomers kept watching the stars, the merchants traded. The Great Wall still stood, the Ishtar Gate still gleamed. But the seat of ultimate sovereignty, the power to command armies and shape foreign policy, had shifted east, to Susa and Persepolis. Babylon's political epic was over. Its long, influential afterlife as a center of learning, a symbol of antiquity, and a word heavy with meaning, was just beginning. What becomes of a city when its empire is gone, but its name remains more powerful than ever? With the peaceful entry of Cyrus the Great, Babylon began a new, quieter chapter in its long life. The city was no longer the head of an empire, but it was far from a forgotten ruin. It became a prized satrapal capital within the vast, tolerant Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cyrus and his successors understood the value of Babylon's prestige. They honored Marduk, maintained the temples, and allowed the intricate machinery of Babylonian scholarship and administration to continue, largely undisturbed. The great city adapted, becoming a crucial node in a network that stretched from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. For the next 2 centuries, under Persian rule, Babylon retained its economic might and intellectual vitality. The clay tablets from this period are some of the most sophisticated ever produced. Babylonian astronomers, now free from the immediate pressures of court politics, refined their models of the cosmos with remarkable precision. They developed complex mathematical theories to predict lunar eclipses and planetary movements, their work conducted in temple courtyards that had once been the center of imperial power. This knowledge was not locked away, it traveled. It influenced Greek thinkers, found its way into Indian astronomy, and laid the unshakable foundation for the science that would follow. But the world was turning. The monolithic Persian Empire itself eventually buckled under the weight of its own size and the brilliant, relentless ambition of Alexander of Macedon. In a series of stunning battles, Alexander toppled the Achaemenids. And in 331 BCE, he stood before the gates of the legendary city. Babylon, recognizing the tide of history, opened its gates to him without resistance. Alexander was enthralled. He saw in Babylon not a conquered prize, but a symbol, the ancient, cosmopolitan heart of the world he wished to unite. He planned to make it the eastern capital of his new global empire. He began restoring the great temples, including the Asagila, treating the city with a reverence that echoed Cyrus himself. Fate, however, had a different design. In 323 BCE, in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar, Alexander the Great died. His sudden death in that storied hall felt like a darkly poetic closure. The last world conqueror to dream of ruling from Babylon had passed within its walls. In the chaotic wars that followed between his generals, the Seleucid Empire eventually claimed Mesopotamia. The new Greek rulers initially valued Babylon, but they soon began building a new, Hellenistic capital to the north, Seleucia. Deliberately, they encouraged, or forced, the migration of Babylon's merchants, scribes, and artisans to this fresh city on the Tigris. It was a slow, administrative death sentence. The lifeblood of Babylon, its people and its economic pulse, was being drawn away. As centuries passed under Parthian and later Sasanian rule, the great city dwindled. The once carefully maintained canal system silted up. Grand buildings, abandoned, became quarries for brick. The vast urban footprint slowly contracted back towards the core riverbanks. What was once the wonder of the world became a modest provincial town, and then, finally, a collection of crumbling mounds veiled by wind-blown dust. The memory of its location faded in the West, surviving only in ancient texts and religious allegory. For it was in scripture and story that Babylon found its second, perhaps more enduring, life. In the Hebrew Bible, it was the hammer of the whole earth, the agent of divine punishment that took the Judahites into exile. But it was also the place where faith was tested and refined, where the longing for Zion was born. The Psalms composed by its rivers, the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah declaring its inevitable fall, these writings etched Babylon into the Western consciousness as the archetypal city of pride, power, and ultimate downfall. This image crystallized in the Christian book of Revelation. Here, Babylon the Great was transformed into a potent symbol of all earthly corruption, luxury, and persecution facing the faithful. It was no longer just a historical empire. It was a spiritual condition, a metaphor for a world system opposed to divine order. Fallen is Babylon the Great, became a cry of apocalyptic triumph. Through this lens, the city's name echoed through medieval and Reformation Europe, invoked in polemics against corrupt powers, a ready-made symbol of arrogance destined for ruin. In the Islamic world, Babylon, Babel, was remembered differently. It appeared in the Quran as the place where two angels taught mankind magic, a site of profound but dangerous knowledge. Medieval Islamic scholars, while acknowledging its ancient pagan past, also recognized it as a fount of early science, particularly astronomy. They preserved and translated the astronomical tables that Babylonian scholars had perfected under Persian rule, ensuring this practical knowledge survived to influence later science. For over 1,000 years, the physical Babylon slept beneath the earth, a ghost known only through words. Then, in the 19th century, driven by a mix of biblical fascination, imperial curiosity, and budding archaeological science, European explorers began to search for the fabled city. They deciphered cuneiform, they surveyed the Mesopotamian plains, and they began to match the ancient descriptions to a specific set of vast, eroded mounds near the modern town of Hilla in Iraq. The most dramatic revelations came with the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey, who from 1899 to 1917 undertook the first major scientific excavation. His team unearthed the colossal foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, traced the processional way, and uncovered the breathtaking remains of the Ishtar Gate. The blue-glazed bricks, the rows of bulls and dragons, confirmed the ancient boasts. Here was not just a myth, but a metropolis. Koldewey's work, though its methods of artifact removal are debated today, pulled Babylon back from the realm of pure symbol into the light of tangible, awe-inspiring history. The 20th and 21st centuries have been less kind to the ruins. They have suffered from neglect, from poorly conceived reconstruction projects, and tragically, from the collateral damage of modern warfare, used as a military base by various armies. The ancient dust has been mingled with the debris of contemporary conflict. Yet, the city's stubborn hold on our imagination persists. Its designation as a UNESCO World Heritage Site is a fragile hope for its preservation, a recognition that this mound of earth is a unique pages of the human story. From a settlement on a canal to the capital of empires, from a deserted ruin to a powerful metaphor, and finally to an archaeological site fought over by time and politics, Babylon's journey is unlike any other. Its physical presence may be fragile, but its echo is indefatigable. It lives on in our language, in our stories, and in our collective memory of what a city can be, for both good and ill. We are now approaching the final contemplation of its legacy. What, in the end, does Babylon truly mean for us? So, what are we to make of this long river of a story, flowing from ancient silt to modern memory? Babylon's history is not a simple parable with a clean moral. It is a complex testament to the rise and fall of human ambition, the fragility of power, and the surprising endurance of ideas. As we look back across the millennia, several profound truths emerge from the dust of its ruins. First, empires are fleeting, but culture is tenacious. Babylon was ruled by Amorites, Kassites, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Parthians. Each conquering wave, from the brutal to the benevolent, ultimately had to contend with the deep-rooted Babylonian way of life. They adopted its writing system, bowed to its gods, or pretended to, and relied on its scribes and astronomers. Even Sennacherib, who sought to erase the city, could not erase the template it had created. The conquerors became, in part, Babylonian. This tells us that while political structures can be shattered by force, the softer power of language, religion, and knowledge has a stubborn, assimilating strength. A civilization's true legacy is not its borders on a map, but the patterns it etches into the minds of those who come after. Second, legitimacy is the silent fuel of rule. Time and again, Babylon revolted against foreign kings, not just because they were foreign, but because they failed the sacred test of legitimacy. A ruler who neglected Marduk, who insulted the priesthood, or who failed to perform the rituals that connected heaven to earth, was viewed as an affront to the cosmic order itself. This was not mere superstition, it was the foundational political theory of the time. Power without perceived divine sanction and cultural respect was seen as hollow, illegitimate, and ultimately unstable. In our own age, where authority is derived from different sources, the core lesson remains. Governance divorced from the shared values and consent of the governed is a fragile construct, built on sand. Third, memory is a shapeshifter, often more powerful than fact. The historical Babylon of Hammurabi's laws and Nebuchadnezzar's bricks is one entity. The Babylon of the Hebrew exile is another. The apocalyptic Babylon of Revelation is another still. The city became a blank canvas upon which later generations projected their own fears, critiques, and theological convictions. It evolved from a real place into a universal symbol of human pride, of divine punishment, of corrupted luxury. This transformation shows us how history is not just about what happened, but about what we choose to remember and how we choose to frame it. Babylon's afterlife in story and scripture has arguably been more influential in shaping Western thought than the precise details of its tax codes. Finally, Babylon forces us to confront the full, contradictory humanity of the ancient world. It is too easy to see past civilizations as monolithic, either noble ancestors or brutal oppressors. Babylon was both. It gave the world one of its first comprehensive legal codes, championing order and justice, while also encoding stark social hierarchies. It produced breathtaking art and pioneered empirical astronomy, while its kings could order the destruction of cities and the forced migration of entire peoples. It was a place of profound learning and staggering violence, of spiritual depth and raw imperial greed. To simplify it is to miss the point. Babylon, in all its glory and grimness, reflects us, capable of reaching for the stars while our feet are planted in the mud. Today, the site of Babylon is quiet. The wind blows across the reconstructed fragments of Nebuchadnezzar's palace and the exposed traces of processional ways. It is a place of profound melancholy and wonder, where the weight of ages is palpable. The Great Ishtar Gate, reconstructed in a Berlin museum, stands as a brilliant ghost, forever separated from its home. The city's physical legacy is contested and fragile, a pawn in modern struggles. Yet, in a deeper sense, Babylon never truly fell. It lives on every time we look at a clock, its sexagesimal system surviving in our seconds and minutes. It whispers in our legal principles, in our fascination with the heavens, in our very understanding of what a city can be. It endures in the word Babel, a faint, ironic echo of the biblical story of linguistic confusion at the Tower of Babel, itself inspired by Babylon's ziggurats. The city achieved a form of immortality it never sought. It became an idea. Its story asks us enduring questions. Where is the line between magnificent ambition and destructive hubris? How does a society balance power with justice, innovation with tradition? Can cultural identity survive the loss of political sovereignty? Babylon's history offers no easy answers, but it provides the richest of grounds for contemplation. As we leave the story now, let the final image not be one of ruin, but of resonance. Picture not just broken bricks, but the scribe in the lamplight, carefully recording the path of Jupiter on a damp clay tablet. Hear not just the clash of armies, but the chants of priests in the Asagila courtyard during the New Year's festival, reaffirming the world's order. See not just a conquered city, but a living, breathing metropolis where merchants haggled, children played in dusty streets, and astronomers looked up at the same stars we see tonight, seeking patterns in the infinite dark. Babylon's long journey from a riverside village to an eternal symbol is a reminder that civilizations are more than their monuments or their military conquests. They are the sum of their dreams, their laws, their stories, and their stubborn will to make a mark on the world. That mark, however faded, remains. The great city's echo has not ceased. It simply changed its form, traveling from stone, to clay, to parchment, to memory, and now, to us. Thank you for listening to this long tale. If these journeys into the deep past help you unwind and reflect, consider joining the Sleepy Owl community for more stories where history and restful narration meet. Sleep well.